So I'd like you to think about a moment where you got inspired to step onto the spiritual path of becoming or being a Buddhist. Since this is community refuge and it's about, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha and personal transformation. So something inspired you. Um, there are so many other things you could be doing that are easier and perhaps more pleasurable, or at least more usual. Margaret and I had a friend who has since passed away, but used to say to us, "Why don't you ever go on vacation thinking that all the money and the time that we spent to go to retreats to hear different teachers, like that wasn't a vacation? Why weren't we going to Europe or Hawaii or Japan or somewhere fun? Not, spending our time in, a tent in the mountains with some Tibetan teacher." It's like, oh, so something inspired you, right? So I'd like you to think about that inspiration. I call it a spark, whatever you call it. And then think about a quality of the spark. So you might have to just take a moment and let yourself think of a story, or a moment when you got inspired. For me, that's a story. And I don't really at this point want to hear the whole story. Maybe we'll get to story sharing as we get into sharing. That would be interesting. But just think of a quality of, like, what was it about the spark? And the other thing to say in this question is that for most of us, there's more than one time that you get sparked. So it's not a one shot deal. We're not a one spark life. There's probably multiple times. So you're just picking one. I have a few that rose to my mind as I was contemplating this afternoon, and I'm going to share mine, and then I'll turn off the recording, and we can hear yours, and then we'll pick it back up for the talk. Um, we'll practice a bit and then pick it back up for the talk. So the one that surprised me. Oh, now I get confused on this. There we go. The one that when I was thinking of Spark earlier, that for me, it was surprising when it happened. I didn't expect it. I wasn't planning it. So that was my Spark experience. It was a surprise. Resume. So the question at the very beginning had to do with inspiration and what I like to think of as the spark of inspiration, although, it goes by many names. It could be a flash of inspiration, a moment of insight, a catalyst came out in the discussion. It can be many things. I like spark, though, myself, because it has a quality of they are very obvious when there are sparks, and they're both subtle and ephemeral, very temporary, and yet right there. Um, and so they're not something you can't hold on to a spark. Um, so it's not a thing to hold on to. So that's very useful to start with. And I love the what was in the list that we came up with. It had to do with like things falling into place, a this is it feeling, a kind of an opening, an awakening. Um, um, I love the word exigency, like a moment of wow and exigency, like I need to explore this. And, you know, um, a burning question quality. Margaret and I talked about this a lot as I was, thinking about giving this talk, and we've talked about this many times, and I'm sure you have. You know, often if you're talking about starting a spiritual journey, and all of us are on a spiritual journey, we spoke about that in our last gathering. So you have started one. Um, it's something starts you on the path. Something happens. There are 400 million or so people in North America, and significantly less than 50 million. So that's 1 in 8, maybe less than 20 million, 1 in 16, maybe less than 4 million, I don't know, are actually really committed to a spiritual journey of any path. Lots of people have religions and spiritual practices that they do. But being on a spiritual journey of transformation is different than going to church or going to the temple or going to the meditation center and receiving teachings and reciting your prayers or doing your practices. The journey has a quality of I'm actually ready to do the work that will take me to becoming a different person, becoming more of who I really am. That's very deep and hard work. And a very small portion of people actually want to put the energy into that. Uh, it takes a lot of time and a lot of willingness to grow and to be different. And so at the very beginning, for those of us on the journey, pretty much something must have happened. And this is sort of a karmic logic that if I go into a field and there's corn growing, somehow corn seed got into the ground, right? The corn doesn't just spontaneously grow, right? So the fruit follows the seed. And in this sense, the fruit of being on the journey of personal transformation, part of the planting of the seed is that spark. It's useful to think of, and there's a couple of Buddhist things to throw out here, and I'm just really offering something for contemplation. And maybe the point of the contemplation, if I can tell you that before we begin to go down these, several paths, is getting a sense of your spark and a sense of it. It's not a thing, so it's also not something you can capture or nail it to a name. Like you can't pin it down. It's also part of why I like spark, right? It's the spark is a metaphor, an image, right? But getting some sense of your particular spark is very helpful to keep you going in the journey. It's very easy for the journey to get stale and for inspiration to run out and for this to seem ordinary. And then years go by in meditation practice and you wonder why nothing's happening. It's like, do I still have that quality of inspiration? So useful to know about the spark. Right? Um, So that's why I'm suggesting this as a contemplation. So when Margaret and I were talking, so many people come into meditation centers or start to study Buddhism because their life is chaotic or in turmoil or there's psychological pain or trauma or suffering or physical illness. There's some kind of pain that we want to get away from. And that's a reason to come into the center and to begin one type of journey. But to actually take this deeper journey, I believe there has to be some moment of inspiration that happens in addition to whatever brought you in. So, there are stories of people, starting their journey and Buddhist stories, and I'm just going to go to the story of the Buddha. Right? The Buddha is living an incredibly privileged and pleasant life. He's often talked about as a prince who had everything that he wanted, that no unmet needs, and lots of pleasures. And somehow suffering, the struggle quality of life, the pain, the inevitable death, sickness, loss, penetrates him. And so that's like I want to go to the meditation center because I'm so, um, I see how hard things are. Um, there's a story in one of the lives of the Buddha that says, as a young man, uh, he's out and he's looking at, this field being plowed, and he sees the oxen pulling the plow. The oxen are straining. The farmer who's behind them pushing the plow and guiding it, he's sweating and straining at the hard work. The plow itself is cutting through the ground and killing the worms and displacing the other things that live in the earth. And he just is this is all struggle, all suffering, all painful. And when they get finished, they have to do it again and again and again. The oxen doesn't get to retire. The farmer has to replant the field. And if the field planting is successful, then he has to tend it, then he has to harvest it, then he has to worry about the next year. It's this cycle of repeated struggle. And in Buddhism, one word for that is samsara, the endless repetitive cycle of illusory suffering that we're in. Now, there's a description inside of Buddhism of the six realms of experience. And, most of you know all this, so I'm not, it's like you give whole talks on, you give multiple talks on the six realms, and I'm just going to point at them. That from a Buddhist point of view, this physical world that we're in, that you and I are sharing, and we see each other as human beings, is just one of many possible realms of experience. We can see the animal realm. You might say, well, we are animals, but we're not dogs and cats and fleas and worms and birds, and we can see them, and they are having a different quality of experience, so it seems. And then the teachings posit that there are four additional realms among physical beings, right? Or beings with forms, right? There are the realms of the gods, and where everything is perfect. And then there's a realm called jealous gods, which is, they have the desire to reach those exalted god realms, but they're not quite there, and they're struggling to reach that higher realm. So normally, if you were counting from the highest to the lowest, it would be the god realm, and then underneath of that would be the jealous god realm, and then our realm, the human realm of experience, underneath that an animal realm, and then a ghost realm, often called the hungry ghost, and then the many realms of suffering that are called hell realms. And the hell realm, the ghost realm, and the two god realms are not visible to us. But from a Buddhist point of view, lots of possibilities of different types of experience. So we live in a multiverse or a plural verse. It's not just a universe, a one verse, it's many, many levels of existence. This level, our human level, is really why I went through, to this teaching, is considered the most desirable. You might think, oh, I'd like to be in the God realm. But in the God realm, as everything is perfect, it's very hard to feel the spark, right? There's no desire for the spark because everything's perfect. Why would I ever go learn to meditate? I have everything I want. Life is so pleasant. I'm constantly on vacation. Everybody tells me things are good. I'm looking great, right? Or if I'm in the jealous God realm, I'm so angry and aggressive towards taking someone else's pleasure. Like they have it and I want it. Right? And that makes it very hard to connect with the spark. Or in the animal realm, and this is a very human chauvinistic approach, I'll acknowledge that, it's considered that, their senses are too dull. They might be feeling and experiencing the suffering and the pleasures of being alive, but it's very hard for an animal to experience the spark of awakening. In the hungry ghost and the hell realms, equally or even harder to experience the spark of awakening. So the human realm is considered the most desirable because we're in this Goldilocks zone of just enough pleasure to feel like we could do it, and enough suffering to make us to want to do it. No suffering, no desire to wake up. All encompassing pain or all encompassing pleasure, no space or no desire, no ability. So we're in this perfect zone, right, where we can, experience personal transformation and awakening. Um, Inside of that, another standard Buddhist teaching are the motivations to do the journey. So you're in the human realm, something has sparked your curiosity, right? Something has, you know, inspired you, right? And then there's a traditional teaching of there's three types of meditation: small, medium, and large, right? Greater, lesser, and extraordinary, right? And the smaller one is I want to get past my suffering. I want to escape my personal turmoil. The greater, inspiration level is I'd like to be helpful to the world. I'd like to help everybody get past their turmoil. I'd like to help build a more peaceful, awake world. And then the, extraordinary one is I see the possibility of awakening everywhere. You know, that the entire world is already awake and it's just opening ourselves up. So here we are in the human realm with a whole range, a whole spectrum of possible motivations that the spark might catch fire with. And then I asked you to contemplate the quality of the spark you experienced. And one thing that's really interesting is when you begin to contemplate your spark, it's almost impossible to do that without remembering your story. And so you all began to tell your story, which is great, right? That's perfect, right? Um, and the story, there's a set of conditions that happened, right? Something was going on, some moment, somebody said something, somebody did something, there was a sudden shift in what you saw or what you knew, and in that difference, there's a moment of spark. Um, in the traditional life story of the Buddha, uh, his life of princely privilege is penetrated, by an encounter with a sick person, an old person. He sees a burial happening, so it's an encounter with a corpse, and then he sees a wandering meditator, an ascetic, like one of those. Have you ever seen pictures of India, the meditators who cover themselves with ash, and often they have something painted on their forehead, and they're sort of living rough and meditating, and that's what their life's about. He encounters one of those, and he asks, "What's that?" And his companion goes, "That person has dedicated themselves to awakening," and it's like, I want to do that. Like that's got to help me get to the answer of birth, old age, sickness, and death. This ocean of some suffering. This ocean of suffering. I was thinking earlier about famous Tibetan stories, and the spark can be anything, which is really the point of this section that I'm sharing. So the Buddha inspired to resolve the riddle of suffering, and how could one be free from suffering? Um, Jetson Milarepa um, many sparks in everybody's life, but Milarepa is involved in he plots and then he carries out the murder of several people. And you might say that he was justifiably angry or not. It depends on how you want to tell the story. But he's killed several people, and he's filled with incredible remorse. And so the remorse is the fertile ground, the sort of tinder that the spark lands on. And then he realizes that he wants to learn to practice the Dharma, and he goes to several teachers and he's not successful, and then he hears his teacher's name, and there's some possibility of that guy. Right? There's something that happens when he hears Marpa's name that changes him. Marpa, why the spark was important, Marpa put Milarepa through years of rigorous apprenticeship, making him really work hard and never complimenting him, and really, making him do the most rigorous meditations. And Milarepa felt like he was not getting anywhere, but he didn't give up because that spark, right? Like he always held the spark. So there's lots of stories that express this. Um, it's not just, and this spark isn't just in Buddhism. I was trying to think earlier, like what's another story one could tell about the spark, um, and you might tell the story of um, Francis of Assisi. Francis is a young man in Italy in the 14th century, I believe, and he's home from a war. He has PTSD. That's what we would say today. He's traumatized by his experience in this war between Assisi and Perugia, I think. And he has a moment where, a moment of inspiration where, the way past his suffering is to let everything go. And so he goes to the town square and functionally strips himself naked and lets it all go and walks away and chooses a life of radical poverty. But there's some spark of like, I can't go further by holding on to what was there before. I want joy. It seems that the spark created joy in him, right? And my joy will arise from letting go. That's not how it is for everybody. It's this one spark, it's not a one spark fits all, you know, contemplation. It's like, what's your spark? Or you might think of Moses, right? I'm just, like every religion has a spark, like, in every story, like every personal transformation. Moses, again, a life of privilege. Um, and he winds, he sees one of his kin being treated as like he's a slave. Moses isn't a slave at this point, but he sees a fellow Hebrew being beaten to death, and he's enraged, and he kills the Egyptian who's beating his fellow Hebrew to death, and that spark of rage actually transforms his life. So, and when I say it's rage for Milarepa or joy for Francis or freedom from suffering from the Buddha, those are just words. So it's not trying to fence in the spark. It's just pointing at, for each of them, right? There's a moment of um, inspiration, and that inspiration carries them forward into their journey in a way that will hold them steady in the journey and give them the staying power to go through all the ups and downs that personal transformation requires, and that personal, a journey to enlightenment, a journey to awakening requires. It's very easy to say that I would like to let go of my ego until, as a Buddhist, until you try to let go. And you find out it's very sticky and it takes a lot of work to let go of ego. So remembering the spark gives you the energy to do the work. So that's what I had to offer for tonight. And I'd love to hear more of your spark stories. I'm happy to tell one of mine. Wasn't really the point of the talk, but maybe we'll tell each other stories and that's how we'll share, or anything else you would like to discuss.